Итак, давайте позовем Сергея Васильева из
Let us call Sergey Vasilyev
Мы разберем основы.
from Positive Technologies. We'll speak about XXE. We'll speak about exploiting vulnerabilities protection or its absence in different frameworks. For better understanding of the material, we look at the vulnerable code from open source projects. So let us welcome Sergey.
Всем привет.
Hi, everyone.
Хорошо меня слышно?
Can you hear me well?
Меня слышно.
Well, just wave your hand if you can hear me well. Okay, sounds good. Thank you so much for coming. This is Sunday morning and it was not easy. So let us applaud to everyone. So that's great we have gathered here. Thank you so much then. So let's move. My name is Sergey, and
наверное, занимаюсь.
for about 9 years I'm dealing with statistical analysis and everything related to that. And sometimes I'm writing articles about that at Harbor, and I'm telling my experience, sharing my experience at different conferences. We are going to speak about XXE. We'll actually first we'll remember the basics, what the vulnerabilities are about, what it consists of, when we will look and practice the examples of different open source projects, how that vulnerability may be embedded in the code, and then at the end of the day we'll discuss what can be done with all that. We'll start with the basics. So first, synthetic application. So we have some server which would get an XML, not necessarily. The user will have to do that manually, but it would be parsed and a response would be sent. It might be actually translated into the code, and here are the main parts there. First of all, certain settings have been set, and following these settings, the parser would be made. And the second part, this parser would be used. We'll just read XML, and if we get a figure, a value, then we'll parse that. If not, then we'll just give a response. If that code gets different XML, then actually everything would be different. 62 is expected, unexpected figure. Okay, we have a template and we put the value over there. And if we add some other parameters, then the result would be unexpected because we may get something different. So the template is there, but instead of unexpected, you can see the content of the file. That was the essence of the XML attack. So the parser got the malicious data, read the data, and then sent it back to the user. So this is XXE, the way it looks like. And it has a number of risks, certainly. Some reputational risks. No one wants to be introduced into the vulnerability base, and let us not remember about the data leaks and sometimes XML bombs attributed to there. But these are things not connected to that. But just do remember about that. XXE may be in different lists of vulnerabilities, Avast top 10, etc. Okay. Speak about XXE. We have to remember that it has two main components. First of all, this is about the malicious data and dangerous parsers. So let's start with the data. Who understands what the essence and the parameters of XML are about? Okay, you understand what it is. Then let us look at the basics. Probably you run into the situation that if we have to make triangle brackets or angular or ampersands, we are using special symbols. That's clear. If we want to announce also our own parameters, we would use doctype, and then inside we can announce our own variables. And hello, Aru, this is a very expected result, and we may introduce not the literal but some essence. The parser works like that. We can read files, we can go up the network, or in case of some Java symbols, we can read the content of some directories. And obviously, this is quite dangerous if the result gets back to the user. So here you retrieve the file, but if the result is not visible to the user, can we bypass that? And we still have such entities there. And actually, we can elaborate on that. For instance, here you can find the blind XXE and other things, and a mandatory part is about
Только немножко
like that. So the essence is a little bit looks the same, and we can use that
принцип работы тоже самое.
directly. So the principle of its work is the same. So you go to the external source and read how it looks like. And for instance, we have the same system. We have XML,
Выглядит так.
and this XML looks like that.
У нас здесь есть определенная сущность и есть
We have so
файле.
there are a couple of
Вот.
objects that are not there in the file. When the parser sees that
И забирает оттуда какие-то.
object would retrieve some data. So here we checked with the resource, and certainly that resource has been controlled by the criminal.
Содержимое вот такого.
And in that
То есть
case,
какие-то
we give
сущности, причем
like that. So some
внутрь одной сущности.
definitions of the essence inside of one essence. You can see another object. Okay,
И
we take that part of DTD and we put that inside. So we get it back, and after
выглядеть примерно вот так. То есть появились новые определения.
words, we see new definitions which were not there. Okay,
Доступна сущность парам.
now we have param essence,
В нашу область видимости, скажем так, входит внутренняя
and then we'll get a query, a new essence, and an XML gets a view like that.
query. При использовании
Then we use the query,
сетевой запрос. И
and in network, a query has to be executed there.
является
And a part of the network inquiry is another essence, which can be displayed by a file. And when this query has been
он читает, да.
parsed, another network query would be processed,
Другой endpoint также
would be run.
ну, условному злоумышленнику. И самое интересное здесь то, что часть
And the most interesting thing is that a part of that query would be the content of the file.
рецептора, да, и если
For instance, this is a B scepter,
можно
and if you want to convey that in a better way, you will see that this is kind of a Busido.
ситуация не очень. Если
Okay, the citation doesn't look very good.
парсинга, то
So, for instance,
с безопасностью, если
we see some problems with vulnerabilities, and if it doesn't give the results of the parsing, it means that we have problems with security. Doesn't look nice. But in essence, there are nuances, and different vendors and providers and framework libraries try to
что
fight against that. For instance, if a parser
скажем так, до выполнения
is
запроса, там есть
getting to running the network query, there is a check whether
то есть
there is a symbol of
попытки эксплуатации такой проблемы, они
so something malicious. So it means that the parser will not let you do the
раньше этот хак обходился
run
не по
the
FTP, а по FTP.
multi-line
В современных версиях
query.
и в FTP-шках,
In the modern
ну, в FTP Connect
versions, again, there is certain protection against that. So it means that everything is quite good.
да и нет, потому что
Seems quite good. And the answer is both yes and no.
и, например,
Because we have .NET, and for instance, if we try,
соглашение .NET,
this is the license agreement, .NET agreement,
увидеть, что там
then you can see that it has a lot of symbols of moving the lines. In .NET, it works very well.
опять новости у нас такие себе.
And again, the news is not so good.
Потому что в .NET есть
Actually, you can replace that with the good news because there are other symbols.
тем не менее, вот
But nevertheless,
плохо.
these are the facts. Whether this is good or bad, but the facts are like that. But the most important thing, we have to remember that there are different essences. We have to read different resources,
И в
and they might be different and
отключаться разными настройками.
maybe different in terms of different setups.
И это такая
A few words about the parser.
наверное, вещь. Я
This is the least obvious thing.
по верхам, скажем так, но прям вот детально все настройки парсеров во всех языках, понятное дело.
In detail, in parser, certainly, we will not consider all the essences because there are many such issues over there. What a dangerous parser is about.
Мы уже обсудили, что такое опасный XML.
We have discussed what a dangerous XML is about. If the parser is processing such XMLs directly, then we consider that to be dangerous. And dangerous
General
parser
параметр entities или то, или другое.
is either or.
Разные парсеры могут настраиваться, чтобы
So different parsers may be built in order to process something, either parameter or general only, and safe and secure parser doesn't
условно все
leak any data at all. Conditionally, all the parsers could be split into three groups. These are the parsers for which we set some processing setups with default
внешних лип
settings and the parsers from the external components when the setup is not clear, and each of these parsers have its own nuances.
явные настройки.
So obvious
Sharp. Здесь, собственно,
things.
отдельная настройка у нас
You can see that
процессинг DTD и отдельный XML.
Standalone setting would run the
Опасного парсера.
DTD. This is a dangerous parser, and depending on what XML parser you are using, there would be different settings.
Для безопасных настроек, соответственно,
For safe and secure settings, actually DTD has been switched off, and the value is 0. If you find a DTD, for instance, then we will have an exception, which is good.
с Java
We have Java,
интереснее, потому
and the situation with Java is quite interesting because, for instance, we have a parser, and here you have
external
its.
general entities. Отключаем процессинг. Но есть нюанс.
So we switch off the processing, but there is a nuance about that because, for instance, in Java, general and parameter would be switched off with different settings, unlike C#. And this is what you may find. And we will see that this is a regular mistake being made.
Вот, основной
This is about the obvious parsers, and the main thing about the obvious parsers is that
безопасным, но
don't make a mistake. If we make a parser safe, but
ситуация.
it turns out to be not safe, that's a very dangerous situation. Now the parsers with the default settings.
Какой-то парсер, и
So there is something
он типа
out of box, and out of box parser. Is it safe or not safe? Who believes that it is dangerous?
кто считает, что он безопасный?
Who believes that it is not dangerous?
Разберемся.
Okay, we'll see. We'll see, but a bit later. And who is using Java?
Ну, ладно. А
Well,
друзья,
okay.
знакомые пишут на Java.
Do you have any friends who are using Java?
О, круто, потому что для них есть простые новости.
That's great because there is good news to them, and make a reference to my report so they could see that everyone knows about you. And at XXE,
которые наиболее подвержены XXE.
for instance, there is actually a statement that XXE, this is something that endangers Java. If we look at GitHub,
Всё не очень гладко.
you will see that everything is not so good, is not so smooth.
С Java
Окей.
понятно. Надо быть поаккуратнее.
Java, we understand that you have to be cautious about Java. What about .NET? For instance, there is such a code. There is a kind of a parser, a default one. If we test it, we can see that at different versions it works differently.
5.2, по-моему.
For instance, .4.5, it works a dangerous way.
4.5.2 работает,
It would be processing the dangerous essences,
потому что
and then it becomes safe. Under the bonnet, you will see another parser, and if we deep dive into that, we will see that's a kind of a
метод включения
constructor,
legacy поведения. И за
and we'll see some legacy behavior, and depending on that,
безопасность.
the settings would be either safe or not safe. What legacy behavior is about?
Я вам хочу.
Well, there is a whole bunch of that.
Это фреймворк.
Let's have a look. First of all,
Что мы говорили, то, что
4.0 or not
в приложениях.
4.5.2. This is what might be used at different consoles. Then we do the reading from the register,
Откомпилированное.
the same code, compiled one, and the parsers would be either dangerous or not dangerous, depending on what is being written in our register. Then,
Если ничего нету,
for instance, if you don't find anything in the register, then we set the value as
значение безопасный тип.
the default one.
С .NET парсерами есть нюанс в том, что их
.NET parsers have a nuance that there are lots of them, there are lots of setups.
опять-таки
And this is a page from Avast, and you can just see how many data about the parsers we have.
То есть тоже есть нюансы. Парсер
So there are nuances there.
вообще.
The parsers of the external components. Who believes that this is a dangerous parser? Well, I think that this is a dangerous one. Who believes that it is
Непонятно.
not safe? Well,
Видно, что здесь мы работаем с
it's not obvious because we're working with the XML,
происходит.
but what is under the bonnet? We do not know. exactly, for sure.
Как с этим бороться, но
And you can guess how you may fight against that, but there are some nuances with external components.
у нас такие. То, что
So the main conclusions are as follows. The
и general
dangerous
или другое. Ну и
parser would
условно, есть свои нюансы.
be dangerous, and there are nuances about that. So let us proceed with the
Проекты и уязвимости.
open source projects and vulnerabilities from there.
Называется
So, for instance, there is a block engine.
.NET. Раньше он был написан
And
на фреймворке. Короче,
before, actually, it was on framework. If you want
пользоваться
to have a block
коробки примерно как-то так. Для нас самое интересное,
out of box, it looks like that. The most interesting for us is that there was a vulnerability, an XXE.
самый
Payload looks like that. So this is the simplest one.
прочитать содержимое
We will just try to somehow
curl,
read the essence of the file. We get that XML file,
определенный хендлер.
and we'll put that on a special handler. What handler is about, I will tell you a bit later. And in response, we'll get it like that. You see that there is a kind of a cover,
Уже идет содержимое.
XML cover, and then there is the content of the file. So the essence is,
Пишет
so
яички туда.
the block does exist, and the person writes articles, and another guy just puts XML and would remove the files from the computer.
Тема проблемы, в принципе, ее мы уже видели.
So the essence of the problem is like that. So interesting thing is how actually it was transmitted outside the computer, but I will tell you that outside the conference. What the essence of the process is? There is a handler,
Мы немножко опускаемся и
and we may
методов и конструктора, который,
go to that combination of methods.
все начинается с вызова конструктора.
Well, everything starts with the constructor.
Input — это данные наши, которые
Input, this is our data which we got, and immediately it would go to parse request. What happens in parse request? Here we get the data that we have obtained,
их в буфер. И
and then we put that in the buffer.
в UTF-8. Ну, то есть, по факту у нас просто
And
мы их что-то
in essence, we just converted that and sent that outside.
в конвертированном формате идут в input XML, и оттуда
And then it would go to
в
XML,
методе они приходят.
and in another method, it would get to the allowed XML.
Ну, она нет.
There is a kind of a check, but it doesn't protect us against anything.
Может смутить тем, что типа, ага, наверное, тут что-то проверяют.
But here we may see that probably something has been checked there, and it is okay, but this is not okay. And we have XML document, a default one, and we know that it's some default.
Где и возникает, собственно, XXE-шка. Если посмотреть, как передавались данные,
If we look at
и потом наружу, то
how the data would be
история, и это причем
transmitted, the story is
то есть по
not good.
еще более интересные перемещения. Ну, самостоятельно
Well,
отслеживать такие штуки может быть.
it's very difficult to keep track of such documents, so this is a not easy task. There was such a parsing code. Before it looked like that, and it would be corrected like that. Just XML resolver was
В сущности у нас отключен.
fixed, and now the
Да.
essences have been
Я говорил, нюансы с тем, что
disabled. These are the MAMs.
нужно быть особенно аккуратным.
As I said, we are setting the parsers. We have to be cautious enough. So, in order to set everything the right way,
Некоторые
and as we have seen,
некоторые на такие
and this is not only typical of MAMs, but this is typical of everything. So, C3PO is been written in Java, although there are no Java developers, but everything would be quite clear there. We have seen already how this method is being used, and really you were right in the sense that it is used to be quite dangerous, because under the bonnet of that method, I would say that you do not know what is under the bonnet, and the default parser would be used,
мы берем
which is dangerous by essence, and would take the XXE payload that would send ping to some endpoint. We would monitor that ping, and if it goes
проблемы есть.
well, then actually we can address that problem. Okay, ping goes on very well. Okay.
Опасный, значит, нужно
If the parser is dangerous, it means that you have to make it
взяли и выставили
safe. So the developers
два интересных момента. Первый,
make
что в API явно
well,
прописано
In API,
Парсер у нас
it's been written what we may do,
на пользователя частично делегирует.
and we delegate that to the user. And if the user says that we are
Вставляется настройка.
not expanding the references,
Не экспандим внешние
and for instance, we may say that we're not expanding
сущности. И
the
если
external substances,
то все, ничего не будет.
and nothing wrong would happen. No,
Потому что у нас есть не просто внешний сущность,
because not only we have an external substance, we have
настройка отключает только одни из них. И если мы прокидываем,
and this setup would disable only this one, and the problem would pop up once again. So, okay, this is something that we have to fix, and this is what the developers thought would be right to do,
о том,
and
не резолвить сущности,
whether to resolve the essences or not, and the right for that is delegated to the user.
отключаем DTD, отключаем.
And we may disable DTD, essences, external ones, etc.,
И после этого действительно
just to be on the safe side. And after that, really, the essences with the parameters are disabled do not work.
один пример. Возвращаемся.
Another example,
Ну, .NET там.
who is writing on .NET, Sharp or anything like that? Okay,
Moji Portal,
Moji Portal. This is a CMS,
которая дает возможность подгружать
which gives you an opportunity to use some
неважно.
topics.
Можно устанавливать темы для...
You can install topics for this CMS.
В чем суть? Есть вот этот код, есть вот эта страница,
So we have a code, we have such a page, and you can
потому что тема...
upload an XML,
Ну и, соответственно,
because XML
импортить, поставить тему. Код выглядит
content looks nice, and this is the code. Everything is quite
то, что
easy.
у нас, собственно, есть файл.
We check that we have a file.
То, что это XML-ка.
We check that this is really an XML, and that's great. And then we request a method. So what is inside? There is an XML document, and exemplified by XML document, we saw that it is quite a dangerous thing. And besides, I lost that important moment. Block engine was on .framework 452, and that's an out-of-box dangerous document.
4.5.2 и дальше безопасно.
451 is not safe, 452 is safe. We look at an XML document. .xml document here seems to be quite safe, seemingly.
Здесь бы не было этого примера, если бы все было.
But if everything is okay, I would not show that example because there is a vulnerability. Question arises.
А почему, собственно?
Why?
Можно, повторюсь, очень легко это проверить по
And again, we can check that. We can do some experiments. We can take some console applications, put different frameworks, and see that it is safe. But we remember that we have such a method which is called enable legacy XML settings, and immediately we see this thing.
Наверное, она
And that means that probably
на нее влияет не только версия фреймворка прописана.
not only the version of the framework impacts that, where there is another project file which
Проектные файлы.
indicates 452. I started
6.2, то есть, по идее, уязвимости не должно было быть.
looking at the versions of the framework, and surprisingly, almost everywhere it was 462.
У них обычно достаточно скудно.
And sharp vulnerabilities are not described very well, so you will not understand what the problem is about. And after certain investigation turned out that in web configuration, it is 4.5.
Файлы, кстати,
Despite the fact that in the project
приложение оказалось
files we had a more updated version of framework, the
так.
application turned out to be quite vulnerable. Another example, svg.net.
Не то, чтобы это сильно на что-то влияло.
svg.net. Who knows what SVG is about? Okay.
SVG — это формат векторной.
SVG, this is a vector graphics. These are pictures. Vector pictures that you can stretch and
Замутить какое-то приложение онлайн.
compress. For instance, we want to launch an SVG pictures editor, and doing parsing ourselves is not a grateful thing, so we will check with some library and we'll get a simplified code. We get SVG from a user, we will process that using the library. We will open that by means of a library, and we'll send it back to the user.
Только вместо
The scheme you know very well, but instead of in XML, We have an SVG. Okay.
Допустим, мы скинули логотип,
And for instance, here we have a logo,
как логотип Visual Studio.
something that looks like a Visual Studio logo, and back we get the same.
В браузере там
It can be opened in the browser or in any other SVG editor to see that they are not different from one another. But if they are not different visually, it doesn't mean that they are not different in essence, because inside SVG files,
XML сущности,
you can find XML
нормально открываться и нормально
essences that it would open well, so that's the malicious SVG. And we try to get hosts, and the file looks like just a picture. The file which we got and which looks like the same picture inside would contain the file that we would like to get out. So actually, there are nuances about that.
посмотрим, соответственно, что происходит внутри.
Let's have a look at what is going on within open method, because there is sending data from user to user, that's obvious. But what is inside the component? The code is short, because actually it used to be quite longer, but the essence is we have a flow of data.
Соответственно, SV файла, который представлен.
This is SV file, which is represented as a flow. We make a reader that is going to read that file, and then we will just send it to Open. Open would process the file. There is nothing interesting about that. But look what parser is about.
Две основные настройки, напомню, в C#.
There are two main setups:
XML resolver и
XML resolvers and DTD processing. Let's start with DTD processing.
свойства disable.
DTD processing is run by disable DTD, so it has no value. And disable is false, and if the disable is false, then we go to alternative branch. And that means that DTD has been parsed. Okay, one of the components of vulnerabilities is there. We have detected it. Second component, resolver. What SVTD resolver is about? SVTD resolver is some legacy of XML resolver, and XML URL resolver is dangerous, and it contains some extra logics. And if certain conditions are met, then actually the processing would be rendered to default resolver. In our case, actually, it goes on like that, and dangerous resolving of essences would be run. And this is why, actually, we have that vulnerability. So resolver is dangerous and DTD is processed. Okay. How it could be checked?
Ну, на самом деле, там поправили много. Во-первых,
Well, actually, a lot has been checked there.
ее исправляли. С SVG-шками
It's been
исправляли этот код. С SVG-шками очень интересная штука, потому что там
with SVG. This citation is quite interesting. I'm not very knowledgeable about that, but seemingly you cannot just connect to the external substances or essences.
максимально
The criminals try to
не отключают использование внешних сущностей наверняка.
restrict the data, but the use of external
Ну, это, конечно,
essences is not prohibited totally.
на страже.
You have to be vigilant all the time. So the problem with SVG is specific not only for .NET, for Android and Java, for instance. Android SVG featured the same situation.
API внешне выглядит примерно так же, то есть мы
API would look the same way. We take a library, we would get a flow of data, and we put that inside, and inside we are using some parser, which is dangerous out of box.
Вот. Интересно здесь то, что если
An interesting thing here is if you look at the GitHub database on vulnerabilities of XXE, CV611, it is related to SVG, and you will see that it can be found in different languages such as Python, Java, and probably something else. The second interesting thing is
например,
SVG.NET, for instance, is not here, is not in that library.
мы чуть позже поговорим.
So these are the nuances that we're going to discuss a bit later. It turns out that XXE, in essence, and this is not just about the files that are XML. XML might be in different logs, in different
Это, понятное дело, вот SVG-шки.
A database, this is about SVGs, we have already
Неожиданно.
discussed .x. All of a sudden, this is a format of archives, and inside that you may find different XML files.
Если развивать тему, то можно вспомнить, что есть Sharp файлы и VCX.
And Sharp files and XXE files are XML driven.
Защита от XXE.
Protection against XXE.
Есть два основных компонента уязвимостей. Соответственно, защищаемся, выпиливая либо один.
How do we protect? So either we just pull out one of them or pull out both of them. The first piece of advice is general. You just check the data that you receive
Ну, просто проверяйте.
that are beyond the line of trust. So you check all of the external data that your application receives, because it arises quite a lot of XML injections and every other type of the injection, malicious injection as well. But you should not just
Мне кажется,
completely rely on checking the external data, because you may be very likely to miss something.
обеспечение безопасности
And sometimes
парсеров.
the parser security side is becoming more important. If you would like to make sure that everything is secure, you just need to get proper secure settings. The use of the state-of-the-art frameworks
Приложение безопаснее из коробки. Да.
makes our applications secure from the box. But if we would like to have a very obvious security, we completely stop these entities. But if you don't want to risk anything, you have to be very careful, because it's very easy to miss something really malicious. If you're interested about the parsers and dangerous settings and safe settings, I recommend you visit this OWASP page for all of the parsers for Java, .NET, etc. Such properties are described there, and it's also given some advice is also given to you how to make it safe and secure. SAST. Are you aware of SAST? Well, it would be strange if you didn't know. Okay, SAST is a static analysis when we just resolve the code and we check the application security. We do this application security testing in static way. We can find XXEs and different types of SQL injections, etc. But what we need to point out here is that we use SAST for XXE search. We just need to make sure that we take into account the framework version as well. So just check the project file and see what links to what. Taint analysis also prevents the spreading of malicious data across your app. We already checked how they could spread. So SAST may do this analysis and improve the security. Although there are some limitations. For example, we don't have the source. We get it from elsewhere. With our SAST, we track that we get SVG from user. That's where we get external data from some user. Okay, we understand that. But if you drill down the open method, you don't really know, because we don't have the source code to analyze it. Here we may want to drill down the bytecode and analyze it, or use an alternative option. And this conference already mentioned databases of knowledge database. SAST developers may figure out that these methods would not receive any external data, and that's how you find this limitation, that's how you find this vulnerability. Or you use another set of tools. They are called SCE, Software Composition Analysis. Basically, they stipulate that such and such components are dangerous. For example, SVG.NET version you're using is vulnerable and dangerous. They rely upon free of charge GitHub Advisor database. GitHub Alerts relies upon their database, for instance. But with SCE solutions, there are also some subtleties that SVG.NET library is not contained in the GitHub Advisor database, and it does not even have a CV there. In a private database, there may be such solutions, and it contains such data about this library. We'll get the warning. Otherwise, we will not get any warning at all. Both SCE and SAST become more omnipresent in our lives, so you may already be seeing some console solutions as box solutions based upon such composition analysis, checking the malicious and dangerous libraries. Otherwise, you can also check everything up manually just to see how it all works, and give it a try and touch this problem and make sure that there is a problem, and not just simply listen to the presentation. You can do it manually. Create an endpoint and create XMLs to check the results. That there is a very important point. If you didn't break it on your own, maybe there is still a problem. You can try this out, but you can, of course, not completely trust it. Here are some XMLs like you can take and borrow to start working, so you can send them to your endpoints for tests. I would like to give you some advice. Check your input data, make parsers safe, deactivate DTD, deactivate entities, and don't forget that permit entities are shut down in different ways. Use SAST to verify code, and use the dependency check with the SCA solutions. But overall, you just need to secure development process in the first place, make them secure initially, make your development secure. I'm almost done. Please evaluate my report right now, my presentation. We'll use your feedback. Now I am done. And I'm ready to take your questions, if any. Yes, of course, thank you. Let's evaluate the presentation. And of course, you can send all your questions by using the Telegram bot, and I will read them. Question number one from Yuri. Is it convenient and realistic to find the XXE with SAST, or you can use DAST as well? I don't have any user experience of DAST, so I don't know. What I know for sure, no, I think DAST, you can use DAST as well. You cannot rely upon SAST completely, because there are some use cases that only based upon the code analysis, you cannot be absolutely sure that the problem exists. How to put it? I think SAST, in theory, may be put into a paranoid mode, and you will not take into account legacy settings. But there are some subtleties. I think I would use the both. DevC hopes use both DAST and SAST, so that's what you need to bear in mind. Next question. What about Cobast COP10 development next year and the XXE as such? Next year, I mean. WASP Top 10, is it updated next year? I'm completely unaware of that. What I mean here is that the version before the last one was released in 2017, and the last one was released in 2021, and so far I've not heard anything about the updates. What about the update story? In 2017, XXE was a separate category, and in 2021 it went into a subcategory. In actual fact, it disappeared from top 10, but it still remained in the subcategory. So I believe in that subcategory, that's where it belongs for a while. Next question from Arthur. Why not simply wrap parser, processing, isolate processing, and not find any safe alternative solution? Why not simply wrap the parser. That's the quote. Well, if we could put it in the settings, you do not create extra entities and don't use any wrapping. You mean here that you create a wrap, wrap it up in the default settings. Wrap it up in the default settings in the beginning. It's an option, yes, you can do that. However, if you think about SAST and how it works, when we create additional wraps, additional entities, it actually complicates its work. It makes it work harder. It's up to you to decide. I think you just need to personally remember that you just need to initiate secure settings in the first place. Maria, thanks you for this presentation. What XXE case was most memorable for you and most interesting for you? It's an interesting question. I think there were two cases. No, not two. In actual fact, there were many. All those I showed you in the slides, and there are still many that I did not show. All of them are memorable, like the block engine, for instance. Block is there. It does not send anything, but you can pull out the files there. svg.net, you exchange images there. And there's also a vulnerability, file vulnerability there. Another one, C3PO, we shut down, we were setting the settings secure, and the parser was still left vulnerable. It was not the XXE example, but previously I saw that people fixed the vulnerability, and in a year it is still remaining there. So all of those cases were interesting. I personally am interested about the case which is related to the entities, not external but internal entities. When we discover some entities through other ones, we create the so-called XML bombs. So if a special XML file is opened through the studio, XML Studio, it immediately starts using so much RAM. 100 gigabytes of RAM was taken on our machine. And that's because dangerous parsers with the processing of entities were set without the limitation of the size of them. That's the answer to your question. Next question from Alexander. Thank you for your presentation. Have you ever seen cases when the business user really wanted external entities in XML? If yes, what was the solution in terms of the AppSec? No, I haven't seen any cases like that. No, I don't remember that. I can't answer this question. I don't remember that.
От Артура вопрос, что еще, кроме парсера, может запустить
What else
и привести к
can launch Essence and create problems?
Мне кажется, основной момент это все-таки
I think the main highlight is the parser here.
руками попробовать что-нибудь
We can, of course, manually try to launch something, but usually you don't do that like this. You can, strictly speaking, be limited with the parser and set all of the security settings in parsers. Question from Sergey.
возможность ограничивать
Are there ready-made parsers
прорисовку.
be able to limit the way of the trusted hosts and directories? If not, then what? You just need to analyze specific parsers. There are thousands of them in .NET, in Java. You just need to select specific ones and with specific settings of the specific parser, what's allowed and what's not. In .NET, you can put your own XML URL resolver. Oh, no. That's the properties of the XML resolver. That's where you can set your parsers. They have virtual methods responsible for entity processing. And the entity processing methods set which entities can be resolved and which entities should not be resolved, etc., etc. That's where you have to drill down, or you need to drill down, if we are talking about .NET. I'm not sure about other languages.
Подскажите, если
Final question.
в SOAP.
Are there similar vulnerabilities in SOAP? SOAP. SOIP?
Не смогу ответить, к сожалению, на последний
I can't answer this question, unfortunately.
не знаю.
I don't know.
Всем спасибо за вопросы.